wonderful. We really appreciate that. It's always a little bit of an added hurdle to have to deal with school closures or having to manage who's going to watch your kids, or just even getting out of bed sometimes when it's this literally bone-rattling cold. So before I begin, I also want to thank Kober, and I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with Kober. You should be. They've been experts in commercial printing for the last 88 years. So they are the go-to for ink on paper. And then also targeted, relevant, and personalized direct mail. So Eric Weber, the president and CEO of Kober, is actually here. He's in the back. Eric, thank you very much for sponsoring this event. And next up, I get to introduce this lineup of speakers. For me, putting this event together was a real dream to be able to invite not only professionals that I work with, but also professionals that I respect and admire for their intelligence and for their contributions to the industry of data and analytics. And it is great that they're actually located in Rochester. So when you're listening to them speak today, you're listening to experts that in many cases are at the tip of the spear in this industry. And we should be feel really grateful for that. And thank you all once again for coming. And I'm just going to introduce the speakers, have them come up, and we'll get this thing kicked off. So first, Paul Green of Harder Seacrest and Emory. This is his home turf, so we really thank you very much for being a host today.
Our pleasure.
And next, Larry Link, the Director of Data Management and Analytics at Monroe Inc. If you are familiar with Monroe Muffler, Monroe Muffler and 9 other brands. They're a publicly traded company with 1,200 store locations in 26 states. And next, Kurt Zeller. Kurt is the Research Director at Edelman Intelligence, and boy does he have some stories for you today. So once again, thank you to the panel for coming, and we'll have a seat and get things started.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. As John said, I'm Kurt. I'm super excited to be here and to tell you a little bit about us down at Village Gate, but also to sort of talk about sort of our bleeding edge of what we're doing in data analytics and insights and research. And so just very briefly about Edelman Intelligence, there's about 50 of us. We're researchers, we're analysts, we're data scientists, and we're down in Village Gate, and we funnel up into Edelman, which is a sort of enormous communications marketing, public relations firm. Edelman is sort of the biggest and the brightest on the globe in this market. And so it's important for you to know that my conversation today is really about the market research realm. Larry's going to talk a little bit more about the in-house. Paul's going to talk a little bit more about the regulation and legal side of things. But it all ties together, right? I was just talking with some folks like, data is data. That's important to know. And so I'm excited to sort of hear about your data streams, your data questions, your data concerns today, so that we can talk through that. Edelman and Edelman Intelligence is everywhere. We have a global footprint. It's incredibly impressive, our client base. Over 25% of Fortune 500 companies are in our portfolio, which presents us immense challenges. It presents us immense awesome questions. It demands of us sort of precision. So when I think about sort of our challenges and what we're charged with as a company, I don't think that what we're charged with is going to sound unfamiliar to you guys. I think it's what you're facing. We're charged with helping clients make sense of this crazy world, of the business world, and sort of the world generally as it's moving faster and faster and faster. And data and metrics are sort of critical to that in making real-time decisions, and that's super, super critical to keep in mind that sort of real time. And this isn't a unique proposition. Everyone here is going to talk to you about how we address that. And so as I think about the state of data, I keep coming back to insights. And on my team and in our firm, we're not talking about big data anymore, we're talking about smart data. And so the issues of the near past, like access to data streams, connecting to data streams, processing data, even the tools and the programming needed to handle big data sources, these aren't our challenges anymore, because we're focused on insights. And so I recognize that you may face these challenges, right? And I think that what we want to talk about today are those solutions that we can get through, those technical components. It costs a bunch of money to sort of be not worrying about big data, to be worrying about smart data, and I get that. But because of our portfolio and because of our clients' demands, that's what we're focused on, and we have the luxury to sort of play in this space. So I'm excited to sort of show you a little sort of demo of some of the stuff that we're doing. But I just want to stress, like, if you're facing these challenges, you feel sort of overwhelmed, we're here to sort of talk through that. There are people here that can help you get through that locally, of course, because they're solvable issues. When we talk to our clients, they want to know about fast insights, pulses. They're interested in speed and insights. I can't stress that enough. And so just to give you a little lay of the land about the data streams that we're seeing in our firm on a regular basis as a market research firm, those are on the media side, because we do some PR work, okay? So anything on online news, all social media streams come through our tools, and even all broadcasts. So all of that data comes in. If anyone's saying anything, we capture it. That's one side. We are surveying people, thousands of people every day. We're pulling in all that data around what people are thinking, what people feel, all that's in there. And then of course, if the client demands it, the client wants it, customer data, sales data, etc. So what people are saying, what people are thinking, what people are buying, we capture that all together. And that's the magic, right? How you create insights is blending the art and science of collecting all that data and making decisions based on it. It is rooted in hardcore analytics and statistics, don't get me wrong, but the human nature component, tying in the business landscape, what people are thinking, feeling, dreaming about, all of that needs to be taken into consideration. And our toolkit is not dissimilar to John's and companies' toolkits around segmentation, predictive modeling, audience profiling, message testing. None of this should sound unfamiliar. Thought leadership, reputation and brand tracking, measurement, crisis monitoring. Sure, we're doing all of that, right? But we marry it all together. I want to stress, like, how we use the algorithms, how we solve those problems, that's the point. It's not so much the algorithms themselves. So when I go talk to clients and I geek out and talk about this data and this algorithm, they get a little glossy-eyed, they're not that interested in it. So, make sense? So far, good foundation? Okay, let's look at some cool stuff. The trend that I'm seeing right now is truly a trend towards simplicity. It is true, it's backed by serious computation, don't get me wrong, but our clients, C-suite teams, they want to ladder it up into trackable, simple, data-driven metrics, and we call those trends, we call them dials, we call a bunch of different things. I personally love the development of the math behind it, of the data streams, of those algorithms, of those methodologies, but ultimately, in the end, after a client meeting, they're more interested in just the pulse. And so one thing that we need to sort of discuss today is what are the implications of that. I think clearly there's some heavy data nerds out here, which is great. What are the implications of simplifying everything into one number? And of course there's some decision makers out here. What are the implications? What are we missing if we oversimplify and we miss out on some of the nuances of your KPIs? And we need to sort of come to a conclusion of, does it matter? So, in the top left here, this used to be our bread and butter. 3 or 4 years ago, this was cool. We could put a premium on this sort of dashboard. This was connecting a lot of data streams. People were loving it. It gave them their KPIs sort of in a flat, but I'll stress that. I mean, this is just connected. These are sort of flat numbers, right? Where we're trending is into these zones. So I want to talk a little bit about these. So in the top right, where are the numbers, right? That's just my point about getting sort of away from numbers into simplicity. The data streams that we're connecting here is on the media side. So what we've done is we've pulled together anything essentially on a topic, what people have said about it across a whole bunch of different streams. And this is a natural language processing software. It's creating themes and trends that we sort of forced in, and it's connecting them together. We could put an analyst on it, and they're breaking it up and saying, whatever is in teal there, that's good, or if it's bad, then that's bad, right? Like, you can clearly see right away. Another huge trend that we're seeing that our clients want to know is these sort of pulses. And so what we're doing here is truly backed by a ton of data. There's a lot going on in here, but the client just wants to know, tell me what I need to know from last month. Are we up, are we down? Should I be concerned? Do I need to call anybody? And so we're putting, this is a brand that has a huge PR issue. And so these are visibility, virality, negativity, and action. Data streams go in, we crunch a whole bunch of stuff, but they just look at this. CMO, the CEO, they're just right here. If it's not red, they're happy to move on. There's a big deck that goes associated with it. We were talking about this together, guys. That does go to a smaller comms team. They dive into it and explore it, learn. But there are some people that just look at this and move on. And then finally here, before I hand it off to Larry, is a new product that we're doing. And again, it's sort of touching on the simplicity of the visual of it. And so Edelman invested about 19 years ago into this concept of trust. Every market research firm sort of chooses an idea of how to own some data, and every year we pulse check 30,000 thought leaders across the globe, and we have a really good understanding of how customers and business owners think about trust, and trust in companies, trust in agencies, trust in governments, trust in not-for-profit. 10 years ago, no one really cared about trust, like it wasn't a big topic. Today, right now, trust is an enormous component. Our leaders, our CEO was at Davos, the World Economic Forum recently, pushing this trust thing. You had government leaders, academics there talking about fake news, the issues that Paul are going to bring up about data regulation, who owns the data, what are we doing with it. So this idea of trust is super important. What we're doing now, everything that I talked about, we're overlaying it on this trust component too. So when you think of your customer, when you think of a client, when you can overlay what they're saying, what they think about you in a trust component and your competitive set, and you fall in this realm, you can make an enormously important decision about how to sell something or how to position something depending on where you are in this. And truly what we give them on a monthly or quarterly basis is you're in the high zone, so you're good to go with X thing, or you've lost it, so you need to gain it back. And so work with us to sort of do that across this whole data streams. So obviously I'm in client services. People bring us in to solve some problems. There could be legacy issues, data legacy issues. People are busy, they hire us because they don't want to do it. We bring expertise, of course, to the equation. But I don't want to overlook the fact that we're brought in to solve some problems. With Larry, he's in-house, so he's going to talk to you about those components and what he's seeing at Monroe.
So again, thank you everyone for coming this morning. Bearing the cold. Maybe a little bit of background on myself. Again, I'm the Director of Data Analytics and Data Management at Monroe. Monroe is lo and behold, I've been with Monroe since actually September, so I'm not a long-time Monroe person, but I have a lot of experience in delivering what I'll say is analytics to the masses, right? So one of the things that I pride myself on in my career is kind of thinking about how do I optimize decisions, right? So decisions is a lot bigger component than just data, right? You have to think about kind of the full life cycle of how do I have the process to create the data? How do I have the process to get the data in a state that I can use it? And collect it, summarize it, present it. So a lot of people here, right, are focused on that aspect of things. Well, I would contend that that's kind of only a small part of the battle, right? When you think about technology. Almost a bigger part of the battle is thinking about the people and process aspects of how do you get people to understand those analytics, and ultimately try and draw conclusions, right? So in both kind of my prior life, I worked at Xerox and their service organization for a long time, and as well as Monroe. We're trying to optimize decisions by, and I'll even almost call it like a individual business owner. So Monroe, when I first started talking to Monroe about coming and helping them here, did a little research and discovered they have 1,200 stores. So 1,200 stores across the Northeast, and ultimately those stores run as an individual business, right? So the store manager has to make decisions on a daily basis around how do they optimize their business, right? So it's not it's a highly decentralized, scenario where they're making decisions. But, again, ultimately there's some continuity of how they run their business from store to store, but ultimately they're trying to optimize decisions and think about different aspects of it. So in that full analytics process, ultimately to make decisions, you have to think about how do we deliver the right information to the right person at the right time so that they take action, right? The analytics piece in that scenario is, the technology piece is probably the easiest part of that, right? Because you have a centralized control, you can get to the systems. It's basically solved with money and technology, right? Today, and as Kurt talked about it, right? That's not the biggest problem, right? It's how do you get someone, right, to understand what you're trying to convey to them to make a decision to influence the business, right? And again, our path is, right, whether or not it was, in the 70s and you had mainframes or you have now, right, it's all about how do you get that information to a person to make decisions, right? With enough effort and time, you can get to them, right? But if people don't embrace the ability to make that decision, you're not going to influence the business. So I wanted to kind of, again, maybe just to drill a little bit more about Monroe and kind of what the challenges that we're trying to take ourselves through, right? Again, Monroe Inc. is primarily, as most of you would see, right, as a retail auto service provider for most of the Northeast, kind of common, I'll say, service items we do in car, oil changes, tires, brakes, those types of things. But they also have a huge business related to warehousing, right? They distribute parts and tires to many third parties. From an analytics strategy, and I'll go back to a conversation that I had with our CFO, right? We're optimizing our business by thousands of little decisions, right? It's not one decision or two decisions by the company. It's how do we embrace and get people on the same page to make thousands of decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? So again, our strategy is really centered around how do we inject data into the business processes, from the store on a daily basis, from the group of stores that someone has to manage, and then from the enterprise of how do we optimize our supply chain, how do we optimize our processes overall, those types of things, right? But again, trying to drive to and towards real time. So unlike Kurt, right, Monroe does have the challenges in terms of getting to that state of real time, right? Again, many car companies, right, are laggers in technology, right? Technology is not something they typically invest in. They're investing in trying to deliver customer service. So part of Monroe's strategy is really trying to embrace more technology to bring it forward, to try and drive that optimization. How do we try and drive to, you know, just-in-time messaging to customers, and then how do we optimize and deliver consistent service? You know, that's actually been a recent, within probably the last 12 to 18 months, trying to bring that forward. It's trying to embrace more data. But again, thinking about how do we do that from both a technology perspective as well as from a process perspective in order to make optimized decisions, right? You know, simple things around, you know, if my sales, what's the root cause? Is the root cause, we don't have the right people? Did we not message the right time? Do we not have the right parts? All those types of things kind of go, on board with that. So some kind of key messages from a perspective of, again, I'm really focused on the process and people aspects. Let's not when you're trying to drive decisions, don't underestimate your audience. Right? If your audience is a store manager, what's their primary responsibility? It's servicing customers. It's not dealing with data analytics and technology. So you have to think about that, right? If it's the CEO of the company, you have to think about, how do you deliver that message in an effective fashion? Versus if it's a business analyst, you might say, guess what? How do I give them the capabilities to drive more insight? So don't underestimate that, right? Timing is always going to be a key challenge that you kind of deal with in terms of data, right? Everyone wants everything, near real time today, right? That's kind of the expectation, but try and work through those challenges as you go. Right? I think I just talked about this a little bit, but embrace who your audience is and kind of think about it, right? Today, right, with Monroe, we deliver dashboards as here's a set of KPIs to an end user, kind of disconnected from, in a disconnected world, right? In some cases, we deliver information to people on paper still, right? So how do you, and there's an evolution to getting to, that near real time, and how do you make it, available to them to make those decisions quickly, right? From a data perspective, kind of think about designing your data to that process and that process of how you manage your business and how you I'll say present the opportunity to make decisions is going to change over time as you evolve. So think about how you make that flexible in your data design. Okay. And then last, right, the goal is really to optimize decisions, right? So you can't underestimate that full life cycle, right? Because the decision could, even if I can get the data to someone in minutes, right? If they don't embrace it and understand what it is and effectively can take action to make that decision, you really haven't done anything from a data analytics perspective. So don't underestimate that. So thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I always wonder how you tell a lawyer in a room full of data scientists, and he's the guy with the really boring slides and way too many of them. So I've got about 10 minutes today, let's keep me honest, and I've got 13 slides, so guess how that's going to go. It's going to go really fast, and I'm not going to touch on really anything in the slides. So I may be over here, and you can read what's on the slides, and hopefully the two things play together like a nice piece of jazz, but we'll see. So, we had a great conversation the other day talking about themes here, and it went on for a fair amount of time. And I'm always struck in this space how a lot of the themes, similar themes, reverberate in both the practical side, in what people are doing and how they're developing solutions and products, as well as on the legal side, the things that I think about and I try and advise companies about. I'm chair of the Privacy and Data Security practice group here at Hardest Seacrest. I'm a litigator by trade. I started in this field before anything like data privacy or data security really existed as a legal issue. before any of these regulatory issues that we're going to talk about in relation to big data kind of came about. So as a litigator, I'm a little cynical in what I do. I tend to see the negative side because that's what I'm paid to do. So maybe that'll feature in a little bit of what I'm talking about. But there's not just risk, there's opportunity. I think that's the big open frontier for a lot of organizations, embracing the regulatory chaos that's out there, trying to get on the front edge of that, and maybe using that as a differentiator. I want to talk about the themes that we have mentioned here today and that we talked about the other day. We're talking about simplicity, about trust, decision making, and then people and policy. Unfortunately, there's none of that in how I see companies dealing with the regulatory complexity that's out there. Simplicity is really, really complex. In relation to data security, just as an example, you've got 50 plus jurisdictions that you've got to deal with when you're dealing with data inside the US. That's just locally. We've got a lot of local businesses here who have regulatory issues from Canada, from the US, from potentially Brazil coming online very soon. How does a company that's focused on kind of getting the work done, customer service, on providing insights, focus on that as well? It's really, really difficult. So simplicity, out the window. Trust, we're in a crisis situation. We all love data, but how many of us, or how do we as a society really trust what's being done with our data? There's a great thing being in this space. There's always something new to talk about. Project Atlas with Facebook, a couple days old. That's great. It's a perfect example. What they were doing with this app, paying people for their personal data, was probably legal, or certainly if an attorney looked at it, he or she could have made the decision that that is okay. But after the scandal breaks, not so much. Keep an eye on that. There are going to be a lot of regulators looking very closely at Facebook and that issue, even though a lot of other people are doing it. If you're Facebook and you've been burned a few times in this regard, and you've lost that trust, you're way behind the curve in relation to regulatory trust, regulators think of it. Okay, so I've already taken up a good 3-4 minutes of what I'm going to say. Still on slide 0. Let's go. Okay, and by the way, I've just learned how to do animation on these slides, so if it's all screwed up, please forgive me. Again, attorney, not technologist. Okay, so what is data analytics? Is data, and what does that mean? A lot of stuff. From a U.S. regulatory perspective, data's been regulated in a number of ways. First of all, category. And these categories expand as we create new categories of data. Let's look at biometric data, right? It's been around forever, but we're doing more things with it. That's the new frontier in relation to data regulation. Regulators, who are they? Well, first and foremost, they're legislators. They're the politicians that we elect into office. How well do they understand technology? Not so well. Maybe a little worse than I do, but not so well. So they've just figured out that, oh, hey, biometric data is electronic. We better regulate that. That issue is probably 10, 20, 30 years old already, but now it's finding its way into the law. So, first and foremost, it's category-based, and there are some of the categories, and there are going to be new categories as we create new kinds of data and rely on new data streams. It can be regulated by sector as well. It matters what kind of data you have and where you are. Some of the sectors where we have high levels of regulation on this front. It used to be that only sector-specific areas thought they had regulators in this regard. It turns out now, with 50-plus jurisdictions and the international jurisdictions, we all have regulators. Even the small businesses that are relying on what they think is a purely local business base, they've got a regulator in relation to the sector that they're in and security and privacy generally. Critical infrastructure, that's kind of, again, I've said that regulators are behind the curve. A few years ago, they realized, oh, hey, we've got data and electronic systems in relation to our power plants, our food delivery systems, shipping, in relation to large areas where people meet and are potentially in danger. We better regulate that. So that's also kind of a recent development on this front. And it's also changes by jurisdiction. What jurisdictions are we talking about? Federal rules, state rules, local rules. If you do business in New York City and you're licensed by a certain department there, you may have to do certain reporting in relation to data breaches. Do we really need cities telling us what to do in relation to data? Is that really helpful, that kind of ground up regulation? Private standards. This is interesting, especially in relation to the Project Atlas issue. What happened there, right? Facebook did something bad. Who slapped them on the wrist? Apple, right? Took down their internal apps. right? Totally hobbled the company internally. They couldn't order lunch anymore. No context internally at Facebook, but they're not doing too well today, especially if you can't feed your folks who are used to ordering lunch on an internal app. This issue of how we as a society, both from an organizational level and a constituent level, regulate these issues ourselves is really interesting. And they can result in generally acceptable private standards like the payment card industry data security standard. And then adding to the complexity, however, is this issue of unwritten rules. Who enforces these rules? People do. Regulators do. For example, the Attorney General in New York State is in charge of the data breach notification statute. And that office has certain ideas about what that statute means that may not be entirely or entirely square with the letter of the statute. But that matters. What your regulator thinks and how they interpret the statute can change your regulatory overlay. And then, of course, the rest of the world. I've thrown out a couple jurisdictions. There are going to be more jurisdictions that affect us each and every day. Okay. What's analytics? Decision making, mostly automated. How well do computers do compliance? Not at all, really. People do compliance really, really poorly. Computers don't do it at all. So that's this problem of kind of people and process. How do we actually get this baked into what we do? I was having a conversation before I came up here about the gold that's out there in data analytics. The development, the speed of development is so fascinating and really so breathtaking. People just want to get to that gold result, the insight that no one else has. And there's such a pressure to get there quickly. This whole compliance thing is not baked in from the get-go. It's often bolted on at the last minute, if at all. And that's difficult. Another reason why that happens is because these laws are always reactive. You develop the product and a regulator figures out, oh wow, that's not so interesting, or that's not so fair, for example. It's interesting, but not so fair. And then they change the rules, or they interpret the rules, and you've got to change what you've already created. So that level of complexity on the regulatory front can be very difficult in relation to forming your analytical products and how you market them. And in relation to all this, very, very down at the bottom there, hidden, in relation to all this complexity, there's no Rosetta Stone. I mentioned we talk a lot about the same themes. A lot of what I do is kind of translate between development and management, between InfoSec and management, between management and regulators, between companies and the public, concerning how we balance all of these various concerns. So the takeaway, here's an issue where my animation didn't work. Let's see, there we go. What's that?
Bury the lead.
Exactly, I buried the lead. So very complex. A couple different issues before I close. What are we looking at generally? Privacy is a big issue. These are main themes you find in privacy laws. How do they relate to big data? Certainly consent, limiting collection, purposes. There's always purpose creep. I find the data analytics companies I deal with, they find a great product and that's squarely within the regulations, and then they find a new product that's over here. And that's not so much. The developers have figured out, oh, well, conceptually it's kind of the same thing, but they don't have the insight or at least the experience to figure out exactly how that fits in. It may not fit squarely within the regulations anymore. But these themes come directly from the Canadian privacy law, PIPEDA. Kind of show you generally what countries are thinking about. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, very similar stuff. The California Consumer Privacy Act, which is coming online in a few years, very similar stuff. This is the kind of thing we're going to see in relation to privacy regulation. Oh, there we go. Very delete again. Security. These are the general themes in these laws in relation to security. Do we protect confidentiality, integrity, accountability, and security of this data? Do we have the relevant controls? Are we reasonable in what we do? Have we assessed risk before we do it? What kind of risks are out there? What kind of risks does big data create? Exclusion? Are we using the data to send coupons to the right people, give loans to the right people? Are our employees being discriminated against because we value people who do certain things and that has discriminatory effect to it? Very complex questions to ask that really quite often don't get considered on the front end. Again, very delete. Bad facts create bad law. Facebook is the perfect example. They're going to be in trouble for a long time on this stuff. They're not going to be out of the crosshairs. Just watch them, and it's a good bellwether for how things can happen for your organization if something bad comes out. And after a breach, after a privacy issue, hindsight is always 20/20 and negative. And how many of us actually feel bad for Target about the breach? They're a victim of a crime, though. Victim of a huge crime. Cyber and privacy is really one of the only areas where we want to burn the victim, have the victim pay for how we've been hurt on a secondary level through someone else's crime. And this last issue I'll close with, and I've got like 4 or 5 other slides that I won't even get to. I'll share them if you want. Don't be creepy. So, again, not to harp on Facebook, but Cambridge Analytica, right? Again, maybe not illegal. Probably also okay in relation to their terms and conditions. Facebook says otherwise, but you know, it's arguable. But if you get out there and you start to get near that cringe factor, that's this trust issue. It comes back to trust. If you lose the regulator's trust, you lose the public's trust, something bad is going to happen to you in relation to regulation. The last slide I have here concerns the Equifax breach. Just to, as I said, lots of stuff. Okay, so the Equifax breach back in September of 18, within 9 business days, the Department of Financial Services proposed new regulations to start enforcing to bring Equifax within their enforcement jurisdiction. They didn't have jurisdiction before, and they said, you know what, we want that jurisdiction. And they went out and created for themselves, which is a legal matter. Legal matter is really weird. It actually is arguably not proper as a legal matter. But they did it. No one really blinked an eye. Equifax didn't complain. They're not about to say, oh, well, you know, we shouldn't be regulated in relation to cybersecurity after this huge breach. So if something bad happens to you, governments can act very quickly. This is one of the few spaces where they do act quickly. Again, bad facts make bad law. Maybe the lesson is don't be Equifax, don't be Facebook in relation to these issues. Don't be creepy, and try and manage the complexity.
Thank you to all the panelists, and I have get to conclude. I'm going to be as brief as possible because I think there's a tremendous amount of value in what the final part of this program is, and that is a discussion with where we can answer questions of yours and be able to give some feedback. So my name is John Laurie. I'm the president of Cause Effect Strategy and Marketing, a 4-year-old analytics and marketing intelligence firm founded here in Rochester. And so where I wanted to begin is, you know, we heard from the cops, we'll say. We heard from those who are trying to put the borders on things, and it's an extremely important role. I know what my role is, and similar to Kurt's, our job is to test the borders, and Mr. Green's job is to help put them into place. So it's not an adversarial relationship. It really is, you need to work together in order to understand where can we go, how far can we push this, and within that, you get these sort of client aspirations that we're all trying to achieve. One, making sure that any of these things aren't creepy, and the other, trying to get right to that border. So this idea of understanding Analytics 2.0. There are metrics everywhere, there's data everywhere. What is the relevant data and relevant metrics that we want to be tracking? Personalized journeys. We know that everyone, as a consumer of anything, any service or product, we want to be spoken to in a manner that we feel most comfortable with. Well, how do we use data to achieve that? The new lieutenants, the new business lieutenants, data analysts, you know, I'm sure Kurt and others in this room have had these conversations where people make the mistake of bringing a data analyst or a data scientist into a room with executives talking about business process and strategy. Well, there's a reason why Edelman is evolved so quickly, and now it's pulse metrics. They don't want to see a dashboard. They don't want to know the nuts and bolts of an algorithm. How can I get to that insight as quickly as possible? And lastly, right-time marketing instead of real-time marketing. The technology has not replaced us yet, okay? Larry's theme of people, process, and technology is so important. The technology side is great and will continue to evolve, but it still requires people and process to be successful. And I just wanted to share a couple quick client stories with you. The first one with the PGA, and that is there is an event that will be happening, the senior PGA tournament will be happening this year in May. And from a client perspective, they're tasked with selling more tickets. A senior PGA event is not the marquee event. It is a great event with a lot of great competition in golf, but Tiger Woods sadly won't be there. So how does a brand like that sell more tickets? So in that exercise with them, we actually took on all of the data for past tickets to this event for the last 7 years. We also took on all of the data for events that have happened in Rochester. So by getting an understanding of all those individual ticket buyers and bringing in third-party data to then create a very full and lush picture of who those people are, what their likes are, what sort of demographics and psychographics, we're able to then help them understand who their ideal audiences are. And then the effect of that, the strategy of that, is then developing a marketing strategy to address those individualized segments. It is not a one-size-fits-all. It doesn't necessarily need to be one-to-one, because then we start to inch on that creep factor. But through a segmented strategy, we can understand how to do a better media buy. What channels make more sense to the highest performing segment for the PGA in Rochester, which was 61-year-old white males. Well, we probably won't be doing a cool Instagram campaign for them. Just to kind of tie that home, by leveraging strategies like this, most recently there was a holiday campaign. Some of you in the room may have received a direct mail piece geared towards the PGA Championship and the purchasing of tickets. There was a definite reason for that. But an investment, a marketing budget of X for them yielded a 4-to-1 or a 400% ROI by being data-driven, by being strategic. And lastly, I'll leave you on with Briggs & Stratton. Briggs & Stratton is the largest small engine producer in the world. Produced many lines of power washers, generators, and lawnmowers. And Briggs & Stratton is carried in dealers across the United States, but obviously their marketing budgets are finite. So even if the budget is in the tens of millions of dollars, in any major metropolitan area, New York, Dallas, Southern California, where it's sunny all the time, you could easily spend tens of millions of dollars in marketing your product. So Briggs & Stratton had the idea of wanting to understand what markets have the most potential. Where should we be spending our marketing dollars? Where will we get the most bang for our buck? It's a simple business question. However, the process and technology to get to that answer are very extensive, and we have our partners from the Rochester Data Science Consortium here in the room, and they were actually able to help us from a data science perspective fully get our arms around that. And one of the things that I'll leave you with from that experience was one of the key insights was that people at Briggs & Stratton had felt very seriously and intensely about who their competitors were. It was always understanding all of these 12 other brands that they're trying to fight their customers off or fighting for space within a dealer. Well, what Briggs & Stratton was able to understand from our work was that not all brands are competitive. Some brands actually help the sale of their brand. So we were able to help them change the narrative on how to market to potential dealers. Because if they are carrying a competitor, it creates an even better and more compelling story of why they should carry their brands and where in the United States that was happening. So we've all talked about what this current state is, this idea that data has changed the way that we do things today. Absolutely. Cloud computing, being able to store massive swaths of data. I like to use the term yottabytes. Not a lot of people are familiar with that. If you think of what we think is traditionally a large amount of data, a terabyte, 10 times that is a yottabyte. That's the amount of data that people are storing, people are processing, and people are gathering insight from. And this isn't going to stop. It's only going to proliferate with IoT. Your refrigerator, depending on if you have one of those new LGs, is collecting data on a moment-to-moment basis based on the temperature, based on the space available in the refrigerator, and all of that data is being sent to the cloud. So how do we move from data to insight to strategy? That really is the question. And it is very foundational. And that's what I'm going to show in the next slide, is sort of what is this process boiled down to its simplest form? How are we using this to drive strategy and action? Because ultimately, that's what anyone cares about. So it's only taken 4 years to fully develop this slide. A lot of time, thought, and process and trial and error has kind of gotten us to this. But it really begins with the aggregation and visualization of data. It's in its many forms, structured, unstructured. This department owns it, that department owns it. IT is generally at the forefront of these decisions, but it really begins foundationally with aggregation and visualization of data. And this process could take years, could take months, could take various technologies, but the idea is to get it to that point so that we can identify insight. And now, what does that identification of insight look like? That could be something as simple as data analysis, finding some patterns. But it could be so complex as tip of the spear prescriptive analytics and data science. All of that is sort of encapsulated in that identification of insight, because as Kurt said, a CEO doesn't really care that you're using a cutting edge algorithm or you're using Microsoft Excel. It's all about what is the insight, how can this help me develop a strategy that will change my business, that will improve my reputation, that will get products to people faster, will get things made quicker, so that it ultimately benefits the business. So once we have that identification of insight, we move into the development of strategy. This is a critical role, and now we're moving away from a business function, so we're moving away from a technical or data science function and into a business function. And that's, again, to echo Larry, it's people, process, and technology. In order to successfully integrate these things, it must be a real marrying and cooperation of people, not only on the IT and data and departmental side, but also on the business strategy side. It is a melding of those things together that is how we achieve greatness, how we achieve these goals that businesses have for using data. And the final piece of that is the tracking and optimization. Measurement is key. It is always key. It always has to come back to that, because data science, analytics are iterative. And just like many business leaders, whatever our growth was last year is not acceptable for this year. We're always trying to increase that. We're always trying to push a little bit further. So this is that process simplified. I wanted to include a slide about technology because we often rush to what are the tools, what tools do you use, or what religion do you follow? There are technologies here: Tableau, Microsoft, Qlik, SciSense, MicroStrategy, Salesforce. These are, in the easiest way I can explain it, are tools, and they need people and process in order for them to be successful. A lot of these BI tools, I think Larry said in our chat the other day, there's probably 65 to 70% overlap in functionality with all of these tools. A couple do something a little bit different or a little bit, but if you don't have the team and the process in place to fully leverage these, again, it sits underutilized. So put your team together and get a good process together before you pick your paintbrushes is the bottom line. So what does the future look like? One of the things I wanted to talk with you about and share an example of is embedded analytics. Anybody familiar with that term or beginning to get familiar with that term? So in its simplest form, embedded analytics is the idea of adding analytics and data into moment-to-moment and real-time decision-making. So an example, I knew there was one. I wanted to articulate one to you that everybody would understand, and I wanted to actually be able to back it up with a real case, and it's DirecTV. So when, if anybody's a DirecTV user here or subscriber, when you call into DirecTV and want to get your price lowered, anybody ever call DirecTV? Get on the phone with them? Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging. Well, what DirecTV spent a tremendous amount of money to employ embedded analytics within their customer support. So now, when you call DirecTV, there is a dashboard that this individual is looking at, and as you communicate with them, they're adding data. Okay, how long have you been a subscriber? They can potentially see that. You're telling them what shows you like or what channels you like. That is all being input. And as that information is being input, data is being spit back to them. Embedded analytics from all over the organization are being spit back to them to help them strategize on how to keep you as a DirecTV customer. information like what other packages can they offer you, information like what is the price that it's going to take for you to maintain your customer relationship. And this is happening in the retail space as well. We do a lot less calling into customer service in the retail, but based on the item that you're about to order, they're able to input that into their system, and it spits back what other orders or what similar products would you be purchasing. It also lets them know where that product is in their warehouse, so they can spit back to you the time it's going to take for that product to be delivered. So this idea of embedded analytics is sort of that next frontier. It goes along those lines of real-time decision-making, but where it will really have its most impact is individuals who are making day-to-day and moment-to-moment decisions, being able to have information from disparate data sources, other departments, external and internal data to help make those decisions in the moment. And the last piece I wanted to leave you with is about augmented analytics. So to the most individuals in this room who appreciate data, going into a dashboard or looking at some sort of technical deliverable isn't a big deal. But how many people have Apple Watches in the room? Couple? Okay. So that is the first step that Google has really, that Apple has really taken to kind of put their plant, their flag in the ground for augmented analytics. So everything that you're doing, walking around with the pedometers, and it's letting you know that I've taken this amount of steps or you've achieved your goal for today. That's a form of augmented analytics. And in the business sense, using things like Amazon Echo, being able to query a dashboard as you're standing up, drinking water, being able to add indicators in the room like the lights we have in the back. As a sales goal is accomplished, those lights turn green, or as a trust factor based on all the social media feeds turns negative, all the lights in the room turn red. Being able to give this base understanding so that we as humans, who still have not yet been replaced, can go back and then do some of that research and do some of that following. So what I'm going to leave you with here in closing is a video articulating that. And hopefully the sound works.
Every day we're moved to act. Our senses stimulated by simple prompts that move us to action. They affect not only what we do, but how fast we do it. What would happen if our data could affect our business performance in the same way? Turning business intelligence into business action. Complex information sourced from anywhere, ingested into a singular, elegant experience. At the speed of light. What if our data could speak to us?
What are our sales numbers today?
Current sales have reached 63% growth today.
What if it had a heartbeat? What if our data was alive?
Everything you saw in that video is currently available today. And that's what I'll leave you with. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Now let's kick off the final piece of today, and that is our panel discussion. So would anybody like to kick off with a question for the panel? In the back.
Yes, this is more for John and Kurt. So in terms of Analytics 2.0, how relevant or is it a solved problem for ETL, extract, transform, and load? Is that a skill that students should be learning to do, or is that already a solved problem?
Sure. Can you guys hear us? Can you hear me now? Maybe not. So for us, there's two streets. There's two main streams, two teams on our side. My team in particular, in terms of our data feeds, the tool does it all by itself. And so that's not an issue that we're hung up on anymore, and that's been pretty new, maybe the past couple of years. Our tools that are tapping into all of those data streams have it, And so they spend a small percentage of their time cleaning. And like, so that's kind of new for us. And I think at the student level, I've spoken with some of the folks out here that sort of concept of cleaning data used to be like a huge component, a huge time suck for them. That said, our data processing team, if he was here, he would probably yell at me because there are components that that's just not true, right? It's really that relationship. So our relationship with all the social companies out there that feed through, our relationships with news and et cetera, they do it for us essentially, and so there's a cost. It costs a ton of money, but we pay for it because it gives us speed. Those guys and gals on the data processing side, they're getting messier stuff if they're out surveying or connecting different things. Like, it can still be messy, and so in conclusion, a little bit of both, but honestly, we just personally can't be spending that much time on the cleaning of the data. And I talked to Larry a little bit about this because it's an inside-outside sort of thing. Like, our clients are paying us to be fast, right? And so I am comfortable sometimes with the volumes. I mean, we're dealing in the millions and millions of hits and posts and et cetera that I can allow a little bit of a little bit of junk in there. And I'm comfortable with that for speed.
So I guess I would make some comparisons to any classical science, okay? Because what we're talking about essentially is data science. So in order to understand and know where the technology is going, there has to be some element foundational. So understanding how to manage some of those very basic processes, working with dirty data, working with disparate data, are essential in order to innovate. So I would say that learning those ETL principles and processes are important, and maybe not as important as being proficient in the latest software and technology, because it is only going to get better. At some point, there's less and less foundational as you work at a firm like Edelman. You have the Rolls Royce of tools and services at your disposal. Working at a cause and effect, we have tools, not quite the Rolls Royce versions, but we do have to rely on the skills of our employees, especially within the ETL realm, to kind of bridge the gap between not having these perfect technologies and then also working with clients that maybe aren't tip of the spear, clients that are a little bit more foundational, that don't have all this technology and process in place. So yes, I would say just like any other classical science, you begin with the foundation. So that shouldn't be forgotten. Any other questions? Go ahead.
This question builds on Larry's point. So I appreciate how you mentioned it's important to bring out the analytics, but at the end of the day, it's how you influence the decisions. Do you have any best practices or some suggestions on how you measure then the impact of data analytics on those insights, especially in these decentralized spheres that you mentioned?
Well, first I'll say it's an extremely hard problem, because essentially you're trying to understand, and measure the impacts of decisions over time, and those decisions are highly because they're highly decentralized. I think one of the things that you can do is, as over time you're starting to understand the patterns of decisions, and as you evolve in kind of that process aspects of things, you start you kind of evolve to start automating those decisions. So as you're learning more, you're iterating around how do you start, I'll say, taking the people aspect out of those decisions over time. But it really is a kind of learning cycle over time that you kind of, first step is you start presenting the opportunity for people to make decisions, and then you start seeing the patterns, and then you start automating that aspect of it. Now, instead of saying I'm presenting you a set of information to come to your own conclusions, I'm now presenting you with the conclusion to make decisions.
and then you start going, okay, how do I automate those things? You know, in a service business, like a supply chain, you start, you know, the example is you start doing automated restocking of things, right? In a service business, you start automating scheduling, or you automate kind of resource assignments and all those things. So I think it's an iteration over time, and then you just, you know, people have to learn. There's a trust aspect that people have to learn when you went from a highly manual process to now you start to go into a more and more automated.
Any other questions? We have about 9 minutes. Go right ahead.
So I'm wondering, so how sure are you after you make the decision based on the data? And how certain are you with our solutions and how can you pursue the customers?
So I think the question is about confidence. And that is a part of, and I'll start, that is a part of the process at the very beginning. So in understanding what KPIs are most relevant, what are we tracking, what is our goal? It is what are the necessary confidence factors that we need to achieve in order to give good advice, or in order to actually employ a strategy. So that is different based on the project and based on the client. Some things can be directional. We just need to know if we should move this way or that way. But then some things are very specific and require much higher confidence factors. And other things, right now we're flipping a coin. Can you get us closer to the bullseye? It doesn't need to be exact. So it really is situational, I would say, at best.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's a great question because there's, as John pointed out, the outcomes are different, right? And so in my line of work, trends and directional, that is what we do, because the cost of that not being precise, that's the cost of it, and what you gain is speed. And so you saw my stuff up there like that. Some of those pulses, with more time, we could be more precise. You know, a scale of 5 could be 10, or it could be a specific thing if we had more time, but that's not what they're interested in. And so there's trade-offs. But I think it's a very important thing for us all to sort of consider as you dive in, because you should be thinking deeply about those as you approach your data sets and approach your clients and approach your boss or whomever, because I show up with a level, I'm confident in providing a trend. It's kind of a silly thing to say, but you need to sort of be bold in that and stand by it and be okay with it today.
I think one of the aspects, just to build on what you're saying, is you have to think about what's the risk of being wrong, right? So if someone's going to die, precision's important, right? You have to run, right? But if you're talking about, you know, trying to drive increased sales, you know, speed is important, right? And I can accept risk. You know, again, this is basic, you know, statistical principles, right? You know, quality control. If you have a high tolerance on a component of an airplane, that if it fails, you're going to crash. Right? But you know, so you have to take that into consideration when you're trying to make those decisions. I think another aspect of looking at this is also kind of the quality of the system that you have to collect information, right? So don't try and try and think that you have precision when the process by which you collect the information isn't perfect. So you have to think about that and the dynamics of kind of the whole, you know, your level of accuracy, so to speak.
And we'll all think about Paul when we do that as well now.
Well, no, from a legal perspective, the thing to keep in mind is that there are always unintended consequences. Whatever the conclusion you reach, there are, because it's primarily the speed factor and the fact that your findings may not be entirely precise, there are other things that happen. And many of those things happen in regulated areas that weren't necessarily conceived of initially with the product. And then kind of flipping it around from the external decision to the internal decision, organizations have very little confidence about their own, or they should have generally little confidence about understanding how their own processes and people work. You know, we're talking about data analytics. One of the new frontiers is kind of analyzing ourselves, using data to figure out exactly what we as an organization are doing internally, not how we're doing in the market. And it always is very surprising for me when you peel back those layers of the onion, how much you start to cry when you figure out that, you know, these brilliant developers are out here, but compliance is over here, and people in process are over here, and management may not even know some of the issues at stake. So confidence in my realm is a touchy question.
So I have a question. So there's a lot of talk these days about whether algorithms can be biased, you know, so they be racially biased or gender biased. What's the legal implications of some of these things?
So 2016, the Federal Trade Commission came out with a 33-page report after a day and a half of hearings on the issue. And from the Federal Trade Commission standpoint, yes. And that's really what matters. You know, we were talking about these unwritten rules, and you know, scientifically, folks can maybe differ on whether bias can be part of an algorithm or a process. But from a legal perspective, they really care about end effect. And again, kind of bad facts make bad law. So you can be hooked to this speed and to getting to decision faster than someone else. And if it's creating unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences are negative to, for example, generally excluded groups or lower income groups or employees generally, someone's going to find fault in there. So in my mind, the question is less, can they be biased, but rather, do people perceive a bias? And what does that mean to a regulator?
We want to be mindful of everybody's time, so we're going to wrap this up right now. Thank you so much to the panelists.